never underestimate the impact that you have on your students. Um, as a former teacher myself, I've seen it firsthand, and you will experience it as well. Now, some of you as new volunteers, you're probably experiencing some anxiety because you haven't come into the classroom. You haven't been into the classroom. All right. So what we are going to do is we're going to bring up some um, returning volunteers who've been doing this for a few years, a couple classroom teachers that's been doing this for a few years, and give you an opportunity to ask any questions you may have of these returning volunteers and returning teachers. So my panelists, if you could please come on up. We're going to have to share a mic between the two of you, and then we will share a microphone between you two. And I'm going to sit in the middle. All right. So first, can we go ahead and just introduce yourself, just who you are, what school you're with, how long you've been working with the program?
Cool. So my name is Heather Brevard, and I am a software engineer here at Microsoft. And I've been a volunteer at Woodinville High School. This will be my third year with them this year.
Hi, I'm Sarah Jackson. I'm now a classroom teacher at Woodinville, but I started as a volunteer co-teacher at Juanita High School, and then I did 2 years as a TA at Woodinville, and then I became a classroom teacher.
My name is Quinn Longhurst. I'm a classroom teacher at Franklin High School. This will be my second year in the TEALS program.
My name is Ethan Rodet. I am a volunteer teacher at Franklin High School and an engineer at Microsoft. This is my fourth year with TEALS and my second year at Franklin.
Okay, so the way that this is going to work is I'm going to kick us off with a question, and we have Grace in the back. She has a microphone. So if you have a question while people are talking, just kind of get her attention and she'll bring the microphone over to you. And I have questions to ask, but I would prefer the questions come from you all, whatever is top of mind for you all, okay? All right, so we're going to start off. If you guys could just speak to one piece of practical teaching advice that you might share with the group.
Yeah, so in general, I think with practical teaching advice, as someone who's a software engineer, and I know a lot of us are professional programmers, it's really easy to forget that you're teaching high schoolers. And there's a lot of assumptions we make, particularly when we've been in industry for a while, about what people automatically know. And so when we're trying to describe concepts that are just so innately just make sense to us because we've been exposed to them for so long, we make shortcuts in the way in which we explain things, and then students are very lost because they don't have those assumptions and all that context that we've built up over years of being in industry. So it's always really important to remember that when you're helping students learn these concepts for the first time, that you should probably, even though they're high schoolers, explain it to them like they're a fourth grader, because odds are the high schooler you're talking to will have just about as much context and experience with these concepts as a fourth grader does. And that can be really difficult. So it's good to just check your assumptions, get feedback from the high schoolers while you're talking to them, and over time you can reformat the way that you explain these concepts to make more sense to them.
Remember in summer training number 1, expert bias. Right, that's basically what Heather is speaking to there.
I'd say my main tip is to allow students to engage in productive struggle, which is something that I've battled with, where I'll go up to a student, they'll have some kind of problem, and I'm like, cool, and I know all the steps to get them there, to the final answer, to where they should be, completing the assignment, and done. And my initial urges were, I'm going to sit with this student till they get all the way to the finish line, and then they leave and they say, thanks so much, Miss Jackson. I'm like, no problem, bro. But I actually did them a huge disservice because I sat and walked them through every step of the process instead of letting them discover the methods, letting them discover the thinking that led me to where I am to give them that advice. So often I don't get as many thank yous anymore when I sit down with them. I'm like, what do you think about this? And they're like, well, maybe if I do this. I was like, that sounds promising. I'm going to come back to you in 2 minutes. They're like, no, wait. And you have to fight that. Like, even though they look at you with the saddest puppy dog eyes of, please God, explain this to me. You have to say, no, take some time, figure it out. And then I hear, across the room a few minutes later, it's like, oh, and it makes such a difference. But I had to really curb that. Don't give them the answer. Let them struggle. They won't like you, but it's the best.
Mine would be to reiterate what Rita said in that video, is to build relationships with your students. Know their names, greet them at the door, know what extracurricular activities they do, be able to have a dialogue with them so they feel safe, that they can ask a question of you, they'll participate more in class. So that relationship part is really huge. I know you're only there 2 days a week or so, but just really try to build that relationship.
Yeah, I'll just reiterate what Quinn just said, just because that's really the most important thing, is that your students feel comfortable with you, because they're automatically going to feel a little weirded out that you're just kind of there and you're not affiliated with the school. And so it's really important that you make the effort to build relationships with them. But what I was going to say is practical teaching advice. There will be days when it seems like no one in the class wants to be there. And the reasons are whatever they are. But there are going to be days when you look and you make eye contact with students. You try to make eye contact with students and they're just not having it. And my practical advice is you have to just lean into that. You can't give up the energy when it's not coming back at you. You just have to keep giving it, because even if it doesn't look like they want to be there, some of them do want to be there. And even if they don't, they're still learning if you're putting it out there in the right way.
I believe we have a question over here.
Yeah, I have a not that simple question. What was your worst experience during volunteering or teaching?
So actually, this happened to me on the very last day of volunteering for me of this past school year. And it was the day that the last assignment was due for the Enigma machine. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Enigma machine, but that was one of my capstone projects in college. So why the high schoolers are doing this, I don't know. But my classroom teacher comes up to me and he says, I have this student here who was unable to figure out this particular bug that's completely failing every test in our test suite for how to grade this project. Can you please work with her to identify and address the bug? So I sit down with the students, and for 50 minutes we sat there, and I could not help her figure out this bug. And it was my worst nightmare. And so class ended. I'm like, I am so sorry. I couldn't figure this out for you. We sat here for 50 minutes together. I hope you learned something from this process, but you're probably going to have to come in after school for additional help. And I just felt like a total failure. I am a professional software engineer that can't complete a high schooler's project. Oops. But it was all good. And, we had a good laugh about it, and I still have a good relationship with that student.
Yeah, there's been many times. There's not a specific instance I'm thinking of, but there's been times you walk up to a student and they're like, I just have this one little bug. I've almost got the whole thing solved. So if you could just help me figure this out, I'll be done. 5 minutes, no problem. You're like, cool, what's up? You look at their code and it's a dumpster fire. It's the hottest dumpster fire you've ever seen in your life. And you're like, I can't read this. I don't know where to even begin. And they're like, it's just this one little piece. And you know that they have to reorganize their entire code to address this bug. It's a structural nightmare everywhere. So it's meeting those students and having to walk them all the way back is a challenge to say, okay, you got to keep a straight face. No matter how bad it is, every variable is named after a Greek letter, and you're like, I'm not even sure where to start with you. You have to slowly walk them back and make them enjoy the process to some extent. I'm like, this is a lot of good ideas. Let's keep this. Let's open a new file and start copying over things that look nice. Like, and we take it one piece at a time. We talk through design, and they're very resistant to that, and that's really hard. And some students are better at understanding and walking through that than other students are, but it can be really tough to tell them the truth, to really be like, hey, this is where we're at. It might take the whole class, and you might not have the whole class, but you try to get them as far along in that process as you can. But that's hard for me. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, just to piggyback off that, I had a student one time who really liked to use uppercase vowels as counters in their for loops. So you would have uppercase O as a counter, which was very hard to distinguish from 0, and an uppercase I, which was very hard to distinguish from 1. So we had to have this real heart-to-heart about naming our variables in for loops for readability purposes so that I could help debug the code.
Could you guys speak to the emotions that you experienced right before you were going into class, that first day, your first time volunteering?
Oh, first day. Well, I was also just going to say really quickly that I think part of what it makes it so hard when these kinds of, like, you approach a student and you see like that they're in a really difficult situation. Part of what makes that the worst thing, because that was going to be my worst thing too, was like when you're trying to explain something and you run out of ideas, like you run out of ways to explain it, you feel like a failure. Like you feel like you can't, like you're not cut out for this, or you are failing this student in that moment. And that's just a really difficult feeling to have to live with. And, I don't really have any advice on how to get over it. You just have to sort of like work through it, and you will get to the other side. But that's part of what makes that difficult.
And that's also goes back to what Sarah was saying earlier. When you are working with a student and you've had that experience that Heather has had, but this time you know the answer to the question, it's that much harder to not give them the answer, to allow them to struggle with it. And you have to encourage them to embrace that struggle. Computer science is a little different from a lot of the other subjects that they're used to, right? In their math classes and their English classes, a lot of times there is a way to do it, a formula, a way to do it, and there's a right answer. We don't have all the answers in computer science. New technology is created every day. So you're not going to know it all. So set that expectation. This is hard. There are going to be things that comes up that they don't understand, and there will be things that you're going to have to go back and study and figure out, right? That's an expectation that we have to set, okay? All right, so let's talk about the emotions that, because everybody's getting ready to start their first day, right? What kind of emotions were you guys feeling those first days going into your first day of school?
Yeah, I mean, fear and apprehension are the obvious ones. Teal's training is wonderful, and no amount of Teal's training, as I'm sure all of you first-time volunteers are feeling, is going to make you feel prepared for the first day of school, because there's so many unknowns, and you just, you can read about amygdala hijacking all you want, but that's has nothing to do with the feeling of actually interacting with students, which you're not going to get until you're there on the first day of school. So I was definitely very apprehensive, and in a lot of ways didn't know what to expect. But you get over it very quickly. You get into a rhythm, and you form those relationships with your students, and you get comfortable, and it all works out.
Similar with me, there's ambivalent. It's a mix of anxiety and excitement. The anxiety being, what does 4 adults in the classroom look like? How do you navigate this? And the excitement of, wow, industry experts are coming to teach the most important subject in the school, and that's really exciting for the students as well to have you guys in the classroom. It automatically gives credibility, and so yeah, first day is awesome.
Definitely nervousness about whether or not they would like me. Like, am I cool? Am I hip? Do I go the route of like, I'm a cool high schooler just like you. I was only there 15 years ago.
Do you play Fortnite?
Or do I go with, no, I'm really old timer, so distant? Like, I was like, what persona am I going to take on?
But you had an advantage. You're Miss Jackson.
Oh, yeah, they give me the, yeah. That was my greeting for quite some time. Most of them don't know the reference anymore to that song. But yeah, just really nervous about what they would think of me and whether I should be cool or not cool, and just being myself was the easiest thing. Like, just be yourself. They'll figure out who you are, what the relationship is to you, and then they'll eventually put you in their cool club where you can hit some signs, like hit the whoa. That's the really cool thing right now. The is way out.
Yeah,
Way out,
don't
not
do the
cool
dab
at all.
anymore.
It's hit the whoa. So, they'll teach you. You'll find one kid who takes pity on you, like, Miss Jackson, please come here. Jeez, we don't use the word lit anymore. Like, no, that's way out. Oh my goodness, they.
My high schools told me that.
Yeah, no, they're lying, But just be yourself. Just be yourself is the best advice I can give, because I was nervous they wouldn't like me, but they'll like you as long as you're genuine in you. They can sense when you're trying to be somebody else, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it took my students about 3 months to teach me how to properly use the term yeet. I think I am about 8 out of 10 now on it. But there's still some times where they're like, no. But yeah, my first day, it was a lot of, what if I have students that are, misbehaving, I guess? Like, if I'm asked to go help out a student who's just particularly difficult, how do I navigate that situation? And, generally, like, that's for the classroom teacher, right? Our job isn't to discipline. Our job is there to teach and engage and be excited. And then, just the fear of, like, I hadn't been exposed to a lot of these concepts in a really long time. I hadn't Java programmed in a long time. I wasn't sure I was going to be able to remember how to do some of these things. And it turns out, you figure it out just like the students do. And one of the things that my classroom teacher likes to do is ask questions that he knows that I or some of the other volunteers in the class would have no way of knowing the answer to, like what the Java compiler is doing underneath for a very particular thing. Like, I don't know. I don't program in Java very frequently. But he likes to do that because he likes to show the students that we don't know, and that if we don't know, we'll look it up and we'll figure it out. And so he'll ask us, we'll be like, we don't know. We'll look it up on our smartphones, and 10 minutes later, we'll tell the class what we found out. And for the students, that's cool because they get to see, like, that's super humanizing for us. That shows that, I can also be a professional programmer someday, because they don't know it all. And so it really teaches students to overcome imposter syndrome because they see us in such a vulnerable way in the classroom.
Yeah, so you guys, those emotions are going to be there, and that's okay. All right, you guys consider yourself, you're the cool uncle or the cool aunt. All right, you get to go and you get to play with the baby and have all the fun. The baby starts crying, give it to the teacher. All right.
Too real.
All right. So, did we have it? All right. So, talk to me a little bit about something that you didn't expect, whether it be positive or negative, in your TILS experience. So something that happened, whether it's with school, with your teaching team, just something that surprised you with this engagement.
I would say I was surprised how much I learned from the students. Sometimes students ask questions where, like, wow, I never would have thought of that in that way before. That's a great question. Just so many enlightening things just about the subject of technology and about the way that students think that can teach you a lot about our industry and can teach you a lot about yourself as an individual as well. So that was very pleasantly surprising for me.
I started teaching as a college TA. Any of you like TA in college? Is that a thing? So yeah, college TAs. Heck yeah, where you at? And I was like, well, I really miss teaching, but high schoolers really gross. Like, oh, they're such a handful. They suck. And I wasn't sure what to expect going into this, so I came in with like, probably not going to be for me, but why not try it out and see what the high schoolers are like? And I was surprised by how much I really do enjoy working with them and how much they've inspired me. Or sometimes they'll have really good coding ideas and I'll be like, oh, I want to go home and hack on that for a while. Like, that's something I want to do and talk about, and just respecting what it's like to be at that portion in life. I think it gets glorified of like, oh, high schoolers have it so easy, they just go to class and they dork around with their friends, but they have so much going on all the time. So many classes, worried about who they are, who their friends are, where they're going to go to college, what am I going to do for a living? My mom hates me, like, there's so many layers of stuff they got going on. And it's made me very much respect and enjoy working with them, is like, they just got so much going on and I've forgotten about that. And it was just refreshing to get that perspective back. Be like, yeah, this is a hard time of life. And this is a place where you can be very influential in their life right now. So.
For me, it was how much the students like really appreciated the volunteers. Like they'd be like, "Wait, so these guys are just volunteering their time in the mornings to come here?" Like, yeah, and it's like, "Wow, that's awesome." And they would like Ethan did a good job of saying like they were learning something. He'd be like, I was working on this at work," or I'd say, "If you go to a job interview, they're going to ask you a question like this," and so they're seeing like real application of stuff they're learning in school, which doesn't happen a lot. So they're seeing real world application, and that was the Teals volunteers bringing that to light.
Yeah, like just mentioning little things like that, it really makes a big difference because, there will be bugs. You spend a lot of time with off by one errors, and who here is an engineer and hasn't made an off by one error in their actual job at some point? Like everybody's done it. And the ability for you to just say to the student, like, yeah, that happened to me like last week. It's a big deal for them because, like, again, it's really humanizing. They understand that, like, it's okay to make these mistakes and that failure is the expectation. I think the biggest thing that surprised me was, there are certain stereotypes about the nerdiness of computer scientists, and they are borne out in a lot of situations. And what I didn't expect was how much the students helped each other. It's not like, I was pretty reserved in high school and into like geeky, nerdy things and was pretty isolated about it. But I've seen a lot of students who are like that, but then they go take that knowledge and just go help other students in the class. Like when they've finished their projects early or something, they don't like fool around on the internet. They just go help other students. There was a particular relationship in our class last year with a student who had a learning disability and another student who was like whiz of the class, got a 5 on the AP, super awesome student. And he sat next to this kid and just helped him like every day, every single day. And that was something that I didn't expect, but also something that was, one of the most inspiring things from being a Teals volunteer.
All right. So, what is one thing that you would say must be avoided? Something, whether it's with your teaching team or in class, something that must be avoided in order for you to be successful in this endeavor.
Is it single letter variable names?
Yeah.
Well,
Well, I mean, that is Pandora's box, right? There are obviously so many things that you should not do in a high school classroom. But I think one of the less obvious ones is, we are, in a lot of cases, these students' first encounter with a technology professional, at least in a manner in which you're actually talking about technological principles. And the way in which you interact with them and the way in which you encourage them could be the difference between them pursuing technology in college and beyond, or just labeling themselves as not a computer science person, much like we do with, I'm not a computer person, I'm not a math person, right? There's something about the way that students identify with themselves as being suited for or not suited for a particular subject. And so it's really important when interacting with students that you're super encouraging and that you give feedback in the most constructive manner possible, and never at any point lead them to believe that they are not cut out for this industry.
Yeah, definitely that. I would say to check for their understanding instead of just asking if they understand something, because a lot of students want to save face in the classroom. They don't want to reveal to their peers or to you that they don't understand something, even though it's literally my job to show me your misunderstandings and I'll teach you. They don't want you to know that they don't understand something. So I used to go up to students and I'd be like, blah, 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 here's a bunch of things. Does that make sense to you? And they go, yeah, Miss Jackson. I'll be like, cool, I'm out. And then I come back and they made no progress. Like, I have no idea what I'm doing. And I'm like, okay, like we should have started there before. But the better thing would have been, okay, I tell you some things, then I say, so what's your game plan going forward? You know, check their understanding, check their answer to see, are they about to embark on a good journey or are they about to embark on a very sad journey in which I'm going to have to reverse later and say, oh, you went to a very sad place. So I would check for their understanding rather than just say like, makes sense? You got it? Cool. Because they think you're cool. They want to show you that they're cool and they get it. But, you know, you just got to check with them.
That's true. Along the same lines, Ethan did a good job of like checking in, like, can I get a thumbs up, sideways, down? How did that go? And so people can kind of like say that, or this 1 through 5, did that make sense? So just those kind of like checking the gauge of the room is important to do. For me, like the way the team would work as a classroom teacher, like avoid ambiguity. Someone needs to be in charge to say, this is exactly what I need you to do on this day. I need to have 36 copies made of this, or on Tuesday we're gonna have this. So like, don't worry about hurting feelings, like just get it done. Tell the teacher exactly what you need them to do, how they can support you. Because for me, it was like they were doing the good work and it's like, please tell me how I can help you. And same thing like with each other.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And from the flip side of that is, as a volunteer, it's really easy to feel uncomfortable requesting things of your classroom teacher because they're the professional. Like, you're coming in and just like parachuting down on their classroom, but it's their classroom. But at the same time, they are there to support you. And the reason that they are a classroom teacher for Teals is that they want this to be successful. So if there's stuff that you need from your classroom teacher, it will feel uncomfortable probably the first couple of times, but you got to ask for what you need from your classroom teacher. My thing to be avoided is similar to what somebody said earlier. Don't try to be a teacher personality in the classroom. Don't like invent a different person for the classroom. You need to just actually be who you are. And if the way that you explain things is not like, oh my God, look at this for loop, it's the most amazing thing ever, then don't teach that way because they'll know and you'll feel uncomfortable and you also won't teach as well. So don't invent somebody else for the classroom.
We have a question over here. Ian?
Hi. What did you and your teaching team find to be the most successful way to handle the transitions from day to day when you're bouncing between different teachers? So you've got one teacher on Monday, then another teacher comes in on Tuesday. What did you find the best way to communicate amongst yourselves where the kids are at and what needs to happen the next day?
Slack. Some kind of communication platform. Like, this is a very practical answer, and I don't know if it's the kind of answer that you were looking for, but find a communication platform that everybody's comfortable using. Make sure that everybody's on it at the beginning of the school year, before the beginning of the school year, and that it works, and everyone can access it. And again, expert bias, those of us who are engineers, even though being an engineer makes it easier for you to use Slack. Like, you're better at computers than your classroom teacher might be. So make sure that your classroom teacher is just as comfortable with those technologies as you are, and that your team is, and you got to be communicating. So what we would do is after every day, we would say, just quick message in the Slack channel for our class. Here's what we did. Basically went as planned. We're good to move on tomorrow. Or here's what we did. This really, I didn't have enough time to get through this concept. We should spend more time on it tomorrow and shift everything back a day. Or we should shave a day off this project. And then on top of that, have weekly or bi-weekly meetings with your team, definitely, just so you're all on the same page. And if you're communicating well, then it's not an issue that the teacher is changing every day, hopefully.
Hello, I'm Mehul. I'll be first-time volunteer with Teals. The question I have is, when we are helping out students and we get into a discussion, it could take really long or short, we don't know, but let's say a lot of kids have questions, and so how do we split our time? Do we kind of go deep dive with one of them, and all the other people get feel like left out? So how do you manage your time with different kids?
Yeah, that's a tough one depending on like the nature of the issue with the particular students. Like, are a bunch of students raising their hand because they all have the same question and concern? Like, is there just like 10 students? Seems to be. I teach technology.
Throw it, that'll fix it.
Yeah, it depends on their misunderstanding. So if there's like 10 students who are all confused about the same thing, I think that it can be really helpful to say like, okay, I'm hearing from a lot of you, like maybe I'll go around the room really quick as a survey and just kind of get a sense of what their questions are. And if there's like a bunch of them who are saying the same thing, I say, hey, how many of you are confused about X? And they'll all be like, oh my God, me. And I'm like, okay, it's like half the classroom. At that point, I'm gonna pull that half aside and teach them in a corner. Like, bring them over to the whiteboard and say, all right, let's all cover this together and talk about it together, if it's like all the same kind of question. And if it's like all different needs that they have across the board and you're just seeing a lot of hands up, like just keeping it short to like 2 to 3 minutes with each student and trying to move on to the next one, because they get salty if you can't get around to them by the time the class is over, or you spend too much time with one kid, they're like glaring across the room like, look at her not coming to me. Like, you murder that relationship. So I just try to come up with one actionable item that student can do. I just need to unblock them for one small task. And even if it's just that one small task, it's whatever. Or sometimes I have to pull up. I have some strong students who are ahead and doing stuff. I might say, hey, you guys, can you be my helpers? Can you come around and swarm with me? Where they go and swarm questions and try to help other students and kind of get on board. So you got to have a lot of different tools in your toolbox to say, what is the nature of this problem? Is this I need to pull a big group aside? Is this I just need to be quick and give them one little action point? Do I have resources I can pull from other TAs and volunteers? Just kind of figure out your classroom and do that. So hopefully that's helpful.
And also refer to your pocket guide. There's a section on Socrative questioning in there. We covered it in summer training number 1. The idea here is not to solve every student's problem, right? Is the idea is to give them enough information to unstick them so that they can move forward on their own. So your objective is to ask the right questions to get them to be thinking down the right path. And then you move on to the next student. So if you find yourself with a student for more than 3 minutes, then we got to revisit the way that we're working with the student at that point.
I also have a little trick I like to use. I look at the student dead in the eye. I'm like, so, you ever heard about the debugger? And students will be like, no, I've never heard of that. I'm like, let me show you how this is going to revolutionize how you debug your code, and you'll be able to figure out what's wrong so much easier. And then that way they can spend the time doing a lot more of that debugging themselves than me sitting there trying to help like handhold them through it. And so if I'm working with a student and the issue is debugging and there's 8 other students down the line all trying to have me help them with a variety of different bugs and whatnot, I'll say, here's a tool you can use. I'll check back with you once I address these other students, and you can be spending this time investigating it yourself with this cool new trick that I'm showing you.
There was a question over here. Okay. All right. So I'll refer. There's another.
So since you touched on that, there were sort of mixed signals about debuggers and debugging. What's your general strategies which work the best for the kids?
Do you mean as far as like what methods do you tell them to to debug with? Like it definitely depends. I've taught intro, I've taught APCS, and for APCS, Printlins will go a long way of just being like, check what your values are at different points in time, make sure it makes sense to you. If you have an error, you're Googling it and chasing it down. And if you're just getting straight up wrong output, like tracing through your code, having them build out tables sometimes to be like, the first pass of my for loop, this is the value. The second pass of my for loop, this is the value. Whereas intro, Intro is better and worse at the same time, I feel. Like sometimes it gives you errors that make absolutely no sense. They're like JavaScript browser errors that bubble up to the surface in intro, and you're like, that's not going to help you whatsoever. Other times it's really friendly. Sometimes it highlights a block in red, and you're like, cool, it's angry here. I'm not sure why, but this code is mad. So, a lot of the times I just kind of point them in a direction of like, what I see. And I'm like, if I were you, these are the things I would be checking. And if I were you, these are the methods I would be stepping through. And hopefully your classroom teacher has set them up with some good debugging strategies and has shown them some good debugging strategies up at the board to say, uh-oh, we messed up together. How do we fix this together? And you can piggyback off of some of the things that your classroom teacher has shown, depending on how that works. But just kind of describing how you would go about it can be very helpful without doing it for them. Just saying, like, this is kind of what I would check out. Check that out. Let me know what your results are. Like, check back in with me, and then you can take it from there.
Yep, batteries going on.
Just more generally, like from a pedagogical perspective, I think the most powerful debugging tool that you can give students is making sure that they understand how to trace their code, like mentally, like that they actually understand how to jump between function calls. And then print statements, as Heather said, go a very long way. So a lot of the times when your students are stuck debugging, it's not because they have a bug and they want to figure out what it is. It's because they don't understand what their code is doing. So like as step one, make sure that they understand how to walk through their code and like what's actually happening in their code. And then if it's something that's like gnarly enough that they need to move on to actually maybe using the debugger, which in my experience is pretty rare, but maybe other teachers probably use it more. I am a fan of print statement debugging. So it also just depends on the student and the classroom. I guess you've probably heard that like there is no definitive answer coming from the four of us, and I think that's just because it really varies a lot from situation to situation.
I just want to piggyback off of that is like them understanding their code. A lot of them love to hold all the code in their head as a point of pride. It's like, I don't need to write stuff down with a pen or a paper. Like, I have it all right up here, and they don't. So one thing I did is I got a small whiteboard that I can hand off to students when they're stuck and I feel like they should really draw. And I bedazzled it with like SpongeBob stickers and all kinds of stuff. And I was like, would you like the powerful whiteboard? Like, and they're like, yes, I need this tool. Like, they see it as this pride, glory tool now, instead of like, oh, just get out your notebook and start drawing. And they're like, oh, like my backpack's so far. But if you kind of play it off and make it more fun, like having a couple little whiteboards around can go a long way for them being like, I have the sacred whiteboard. And, trying to take away the stigma of writing things down, drawing it out, and tracing, with pictures.
Oftentimes, students' questions from debugging will just be like, hey, what does this error code that I'm getting mean? And students don't know that you can Google these things and that there are vast communities of developers on the internet that will explain to you what, a null reference exception is. So I always remind students that, hey, like I'm happy to help you and I'm happy to explain this to you, but you can also Google it and it'll actually come up with lots of really great responses and explanations for what these things are and what they're usually caused by.
Okay, I think we got time for one more question over here.
When it comes to grading, how do you manage your time to make sure? I mean, it's one thing to be in the classroom or prepare for it, but then suddenly when you have 25 projects after that you're trying to, do the best job and provide the best input. I mean, how do you kind of manage your time or optimize that so you can, basically provide the feedback that you need to?
We found in-class grading, just going around with the rubric and having a student walk through the code with you and say, okay, explain this, can I do that? Then you're having that conversation, they have to explain it. And we caught a couple of cheaters that way as well because they weren't able to explain what they were doing. So that helped. The tests were just kind of, someone would volunteer to take the test home and and do it at night with some beers and come back with the grades. But that was
I mean, there's no way to get around like you have to grade stuff, and it takes a long time. Like I guess that's maybe a mental expectation to set yourself if you're a first time volunteer. There's no grading that's fast grading in computer science because there's always free response. They're always writing code, and you always have to grade the code. And Teal's curriculum is fantastic. There's rubrics for every project. Use those rubrics. Don't try to invent a grading system for yourself. It also just keeps you less biased if you have a rubric in front of you. On the subject of cheating, just really quickly, just to validate this for everybody, it's really demoralizing when students cheat, and it's okay to feel really demoralized when students cheat, and it probably will happen to you at some point, and it really is unfortunate, but it's likely that that's going to happen, and you can feel bad about it. It's okay.
You guys? All right. So, did you have were you raising your hand or? Okay. All right. All right. So we are about out of time. We want to thank our panelists for coming in. We give them a quick round of applause. All right. Thank you all for coming out. This isn't the last opportunities that you all have to ask questions. You utilize your regional managers, utilize the returning volunteers that are on your teaching team. There are plenty of people that you can reach out to. Also, the forums are available for you. You have access to the entire community of Teal's volunteers and classroom teachers through the forums. So utilize those. If you have questions, there is probably something that's been discussed on the forum already. All right, so feel free to go out there and check it out and use those. Next, I believe Kevin is going to come up and chat with us. Thank you all for coming out and being a panelist. Have more food, have more drink.